on different paint mediums in general. So some of this is a review of that, but I just thought, again, with different knowledge, it's like some of us have tried oil paint, some of us haven't, some of us it's been a while. I mean, for me, truly, it's been a while. College is where I mostly did oil painting. I did a little bit in high school and then did a little bit here and there. And it's like just recently kind of got back into it. So I'm excited about that. So things about oil paint, just some properties about the paint in general. And you may have heard some of these things already, but it has a slow dry time. And it cannot be cleaned up with water unless you get some type of, I've heard of like water-based oil paints. I've never played with them, or acrylic type oil. I don't know. I've never played around with those, but if you're painting with traditional oil paints, you can't clean up with water. You'll need a type of solvent. This idea that you get to paint like the masters, right? A lot of them were traditionally using oil paint, so it's kind of fun to feel. That's kind of how I felt, like you get to, it's like real paint, it's like top tier. I always kind of feel like. I would say it's very versatile though. There's many styles and many fun things you can do with oil. I almost feel like it's one of the most paints that you can render realistically, just because you have so much time to work with it and you're able to wipe things away and go back in. But then likewise, you can also paint very abstractly, lots of expression. I mean, tons of fun things you can do. Thick, you can layer it or you can thin it down with your solvent. So kind of ingredients, thinking about oil paint, and every, oil paint's different, and this is kind of the general idea, but you've got pigment, meaning the color, and then you've got some type of drying oil, maybe like a linseed oil typically. And the thickness or consistency of oil paint can be changed by adding solvents like turpentine traditionally, or Turpenoid, for a smoother application of paint. So you can paint very thick, very impasto style, kind of like in this picture, but then you can really thin that down too. So materials that you will need for oil painting, basic kind of material list. Of course, you're going to need oil paint, and we'll talk more about the specifics in just a minute. You'll need some type of surface to paint on. So like, what can you paint on with oil paint? There's a lot of different options. I think traditionally a lot of people paint on canvas. That's kind of, I always did thick watercolor paper that I coated with gesso, or canvas paper, which was pre-coated with gesso, or you can get your own canvas and coat it with gesso. So we'll talk about that in a minute too, but you can also paint on like wood paneling and different things like that too. So you do have some options on what you could paint on. Now, when I say gesso, so gesso is like an acrylic primer. Like when you go buy a canvas and it's already white, it's because gesso is already on it. If you were going to stretch your own canvas and you bought just canvas, it's sort of a tannish color, you'd need gesso to prime it. And the reason you need gesso is because otherwise that oil will seep through. The gesso creates a barrier for the paint and your surface you're painting on. And it's especially important with oil painting that you'll need gesso even on just watercolor paper. You'd need a coat of gesso. So like, I'll talk about this in a minute, but I just have like canvas paper, which already is primed and ready for use with oil paints, ready to go. I don't have to do anything to prepare it. Of course, you'll need some type of palette, something to mix your paints on. I just happen to have some palette paper here that it's just disposable palette paper. But oil especially is nice to have, a bigger, maybe butcher palette, or you could even use there's different boards you could sort of get with like coating on it. And that's kind of nice because your oil paints, they don't dry super fast. So you can, mix a lot of colors ahead of time on your palette before you begin your painting, unlike acrylics where you really can't do that as much. As far as brushes go, you can use synthetic brushes that are made for like watercolor acrylic, but you don't want to share your brushes. That's the biggest thing. You may have heard me say that before in other classes, but when it comes to oil brushes, you want to keep them for your oil paints. You don't want to share them. Like I keep brushes that I use for my gouache, my watercolor, my acrylic, and I use those, just mix and match them, even though some brushes are technically watercolor brushes. I'll just mix and match them, but I have separate oil brushes. Traditionally, you know, I feel like natural long handle brushes is what they recommend for oil, but I think you can use what you feel comfortable with so long as you're keeping it for oil paint. And I'll show you some of my brushes in a minute that I have for oil painting. Solvents, so turpentine or terpenoid, the safe option, mineral spirits. This is how you'll not only clean your brushes, but you'll also do washes and you know, change the consistency of your paint with the solvent as well. You'll need some type of glass jar or like metal container, and I'll show you kind of what I've got in a minute for your oils, for your solvents. I think palette knives are handy for mixing. They're not necessary, but I've mentioned this before of how when we mix colors with our paintbrushes actually hold so much paint inside of it that oftentimes we'll end up wasting some. So mixing with a palette knife can help prevent that. But again, not necessary, just a little extra. And then optional, there are mediums that you can get for oil, which I'll talk about more in a minute, that you can do things like slow the drying time, because oils can sometimes take like a week to dry, depending on how much you have layered on there, or even more. It just really depends. You kind of have to read about your paint and what it says and kind of see. And I think it depends where you live and the climate and all that kind of stuff too. But you can get mediums that will help, just like with acrylic paint, you can get mediums that make the paint stay wet longer. You can do the same kind of thing here. I'm letting Susan in a minute. Cool. So again, I sort of mentioned this already, different surfaces for painting, and it says watercolor down there at the bottom. That's because I had the same slide in that other slideshow, like I was saying. But canvas is great, canvas paper, wood panel, watercolor paper, again, as long as you're priming with gesso. Hey, Susan.
Hi. Took me a while to get in.
No, I'm sorry about that. I'm glad you made it.
That's all right.
Oh, we haven't done a ton yet. I'm just kind of talking about some basics, kind of getting started. So you didn't have it missed a whole ton. And I did post a link to this in the chat, just for anyone who might want to reference it later. So just some pros and cons. And again, I don't even know if these are pros and cons. They're just properties of oil paint and things to consider, more or less, versus pros and cons, really. So maybe I should reword that. But oil paint, of course, has slow drying time. So it's good for people like me. I like to work kind of slow. I like to take my time. I dilly-dally sometimes. So I kind of like that it's slow. It's forgiving. It's easy to correct any mistakes that you've done due to the slow drying time. You can simply wipe off an area and repaint it. And then the con could also be slow drying time. It's a pro and a con, right? Depending on the way you look at it. Sometimes you have to be patient and you have to wait for layers to dry before you are truly ready to move on. So because of that, maybe you have a few paintings you're working on at the same time and you just kind of rotate them, or maybe you have a little series, or, you know, again, or it can make for nice kind of sessions here and there. Like maybe you have a couple painting sessions a week and you're working on an oil painting over a period of time. So again, a pro and a con, depending how you look at it. And then again, you just have to be careful with some of the solvents. I think they've done a nice job doing some more natural options. Like I even purchased Terpenoid Natural now. But you just, you know, make sure you're checking what the chemicals are and where you're working. I think they've gotten a lot better with newer stuff, but like traditionally speaking, some of the stuff in oil paint and some of the chemicals are pretty harsh. So you have to be careful with that. So again, just, you know, check what's in the paints you buy and all that good stuff. And you know, something to be mindful of course. No, I've got, so that's not it. It wasn't progressing. There we go. So oil paints, there is a ton of paints out there. So many different paints. And Nora, you might even have some recommendations of like paints you enjoy that you've used, since I know you've painted with oils. So I kind of put up some that I have experience with. And I will tell you, my very first set of oil paints that I was ever, like, I was gifted a set from, I think, my parents when I was in high school, was like that Reeves brand that you see sometimes at, you know, Hobby Lobby, Michael's, those places. And, you know, that I'll say it's not like it's terrible, but it's not the true experience of oil sometimes, I feel like. And again, that was a long time ago that I tried those paints. That was when I was in high school, so they may have improved since then. I have no idea. I haven't tried them since then. But these are the paints I've tried more recently and I've enjoyed. So the Arteza, that's what I have right here. And I've done a little bit with them. I haven't tried every single color. I haven't painted a ton, but so far I feel like it's a nice set. Like it's a good beginner getting into it set. I think it's about $20. I feel like that's reasonable for oil because they are typically expensive. I mean, they're little tubes, but again, it's good to get you started with. Blick on the bottom there, you can go, Blick has a website, and that's kind of like their name brand. That's their company. It's almost like when you go to the grocery store brand, you know? I feel like it's that, but I feel like their stuff I've been impressed with. So I think, again, it's not top of the line, like best, but I think it's a really good one to kind of get started with. And then if you want to go a little bit more upgrade, just a little bit more, because you think you're really going to get into oil painting, Winsor & Newton you can't go wrong with. And there's some other brands on that level in that range, but you're going to find that's typically a higher price point than like the Arteza or the Blick to get started with. But if you ever have questions, if you're like wanting to buy oil paints and you're just not sure, let me know. But like I said, the Arteza for about $20 for the basic starter set, I thought that's a pretty good deal.
Mm-hmm.
Again, some other basic supplies that you'll need, some type of palette. I love the Butcher tray. I use it for gouache, watercolor, acrylic, and I'll use it for oil. I like it for everything. I'll use different ones. But they're really nice, but you can use anything. Palette paper, a plate, you know, a board with some plastic over it, whatever you've got for a palette. You'll need Turpenoid or some type, like I said, solvent cleaner for oils. Like I mentioned, mine is a natural, but this one right here that's on the screen, that's what I used all through college. It looked like exactly like that. And that's what they always had in the paint studio, was that exact one. You'll want some type of glass jar to keep that in, or container. You don't want to keep it in like a plastic container necessarily. I don't know. I feel like it should be in a glass jar. I don't know. You could decide. I guess it does come in a plastic jug, but I always felt like a glass jar was what it needed to be in. So that's what I'm saying. And that's what I have here. I have a metal one, a metal container, and a glass container. So I don't know. I guess just that's my recommendation if you want to do something else though, you know. Do your thing. Rags or paper towels. I actually don't have any rags on hand right now, so I just have a stack of paper towels, but rags are nice for cleaning. Your brushes, of course, which I've talked about, and surface I've talked about. That's the picture of that canvas paper that I have. And then just some helpful supplies, some other things. Easels, I think, are just nice so you can work vertically, but you don't need one, of course. Palette knives are nice. Because again, the mixing, you don't waste as much paint loading in your brushes. This right here, this cleaner, it's called Original B&J, the Masters Brush Cleaner. I just got some of this on Amazon. Love it. So when I'm done painting with oils, I clean with my Turpenoid. But then when I'm done, I go upstairs and to my sink and I use this brush cleaner and wash it with water and this cleaner. And it's really, really nice. I don't think it was super duper expensive, but I got it from Amazon, this exact one. I actually just keep it next to my sink. But sure enough, it really pulls that extra paint out of your brushes you think you didn't get. And you can use it for watercolor, acrylic, oil, whatever. And then the little jar, like the metal jar, mine is a different shape, but similar. I got that from Amazon too. And that is a brush cleaner. And inside's like a little strainer almost, where you can clean your brush and then you have the Turpenoid in there too. And then it gives you a surface to clean your brush on. So that was super nice. You don't need it, but I found that my brushes got a lot cleaner with this, and I'd never used one before. All through college, I just used my little glass jar I was raving about. And then, of course, different mediums. I have a dry medium, the fast dry medium here, and it also improves gloss. So there's different mediums you can get, but you don't need them. They're not necessary, but they do different things. Make it glossy, change the texture of the paint, make the dry time go faster. So different things like that you can get if you want to. All right. So, any questions on any of that stuff so far?
I had a question about the linseed oil. And what do you use that for?
So linseed oil can be used to like change the texture of the oil paint. Like you can use it. It's kind of like, imagine like an acrylic paint when we use like a gloss medium or a gel medium kind of idea. And I think, Nora, do you use linseed oil when you're painting with oils?
Yeah, once in a great while I will.
Okay. And when you're using it, how would you describe maybe how it changes your paint?
I typically use it when my paint tubes are old and I have to thin them out a little bit.
Oh,
Or if I want a more transparent look, then I'll use that. But I don't use it that much, but it's handy when you do need something to mix with the oil.
And I'll show you too, like you can just use your mineral spirits, your Turpenoid to thin as well. Like that's what I'll do to start. That's what I was taught with. In fact, my painting professor didn't even like tell me about linseed oil. I didn't even learn about that till later. We did everything with just our Turpenoid.
Oh.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why, but we talked about that in other classes, how you don't always know. So I'm not sure why he didn't talk about that. So, but anyway.
I had a question on it looked like they were metal trays.
Yes.
In your one slide. Did you use those as pallets?
I use it as a palette, a butcher tray.
It's called a butcher tray. Is it metal?
It's metal. It's a metal butcher tray. So, and I'll use it for, in fact, my gouache one is sitting right here. I can show you my gouache one and say, I actually never clean my gouache one off. My gouache one just stays full of gouache all the time.
Oh.
Because I can just keep rewetting this and keep using it again. But the acrylic one.
I do this too.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And Laura, I got it at the Sam's Club over by your mother's place.
Oh, really?
And it's a pack of 2. And I think it's basically like what Jen has.
That's perfect.
Just silver.
Yep.
Aluminum.
Oh, for goodness. And then is it easy to clean the oils off of, or do you?
Well, I haven't used oil, so I don't know.
Okay.
Oil,
Acrylic's water.
Yes.
Acrylic peels with hot water. I find it's best to let the acrylic dry, and then just let the hot water sit there, and you can see it bubble up, and then you can just like wipe it away. And then I dump the acrylic paint in the garbage then, so it doesn't go down the sink. And then with oils, you could just take your Turpenoid on a rag and then wipe it. and then keep wiping. That's how I
Yeah.
cleaned my palette in college. Because I was thinking to myself, I use this palette paper sometimes because sometimes I feel lazy, I'm not gonna lie, and I toss it when I'm done with the work. And sometimes I just really like this. But then
Mhm.
I was thinking, I was like, how did I clean my palette back in college? Because we just had these big, we had boards. They're almost like masonite boards with like a sheen on it.
Oh.
And so we just would take some Turpenoid on a rag and just wipe it, and then do
Uh-huh.
another wipe and another wipe, and then just clean it that way. So I imagine the butcher tray would be very, very similar.
Hey, Jennifer.
Okay. Cool.
Quick
Yeah.
question. You said
Yeah.
you can keep wetting the board, and that's the oil paint, and you can continue.
Oh, yeah. So what I showed you, the one I held up, that was gouache. That was gouache on there, and the gouache can just you can keep re-wetting gouache
That's-
over and over and over
okay.
again. But the oil sitting out, I left a piece of palette paper sitting out for like 2 weeks with oil paint on it, and it stayed wet like for 2 weeks
Oh,
without.
wow.
Okay.
So like, it's not like when you go take a break from your acrylic and you come back and everything is dried out. Like, no, it's fine. And the other thing you can do is you can put a little drop of, medium or mineral spirits on there or something, or just put a little piece of plastic on it if you walk away from it. So you'll find your palette stays wet for quite a while.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, and if you guys have questions as we go, just pop on and ask. That's great.
To preserve my oil paint,
Yeah.
to continue along, I freeze it in a
Yeah,
Tupperware.
Wow.
Really?
Did you put it in a bag and freeze it?
I have a special little tiny Tupperware,
Mhm.
and I just cut the paper, it fits in there, and I freeze it, and then it thaws out in like 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and I can continue, not
Said that.
waste.
Yes.
Because somebody else, or I think I read that, or somebody else said that to me recently, and I had never tried that. So
It really works.
that's awesome. Yeah, I guess in college they didn't think of telling us that because they probably didn't have enough freezer space for all of us. But when you're at home, that's definitely worth trying to preserve your paint. Yeah, it's expensive, and if you mix all your colors ahead of time,
Right.
change the way you paint.
Yeah.
Like really, it can be
Right.
a totally different workflow process, because when you're painting with acrylic, you can't pre-mix every color you're going to use. It'll all dry out unless you got little containers to store it all in, but that's
Mhm.
crazy. But with your oils, like, you can mix all these swatches of all these colors and have them ready to roll. And then as you're painting, it's a totally different process, which is neat. Which is the cool thing about all these different paint styles, for sure.
What if you could like mix them in a ice cube tray?
Oh, I bet you could.
Huh.
I bet you could, Lee. That could be interesting. And then pop that in the freezer.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea. Yeah, try it. I think it'd be
You should try that
Yeah.
and let us know.
Okay, I will.
that makes me think, when I do that with my upper level students, I could have them put them in ice cube trays and we could put them in the freezer. So I
Yeah.
have enough freezers
Yeah.
for like one
Yeah.
class. Ooh, I like it. See, you guys are inspiring. Love it. All right, so here are my Arteza oils. Is this the right way for you guys? The words aren't backwards, right?
No, they're
It's
it's
good.
good.
Funny, is they're backwards to me. But I would rather have them be backwards to me and not to you. So this is better.
It looks good.
Yeah. So I mean, get your 24 colors, pretty
Wow.
basic. Although, to be honest with you, I think starting with a limited color palette is best. I mean, if you buy a set, great, but you could also just buy these individually. So like, if you were gonna buy them individually, like the colors, like a burnt sienna, I think is really important to have. In fact, this is what, when I was in college, we did a bunch of beginning paintings and we only used burnt sienna for like a couple weeks.
Wow.
We just did paintings only in burnt sienna, and then we started using other colors. A lot of underpainting and things like that could be done with burnt sienna. Dora, when you're painting in oils, do you typically underpaint?
I don't know.
No? Okay. And you don't have to. You don't have to underpaint.
Mhm.
But I was taught to underpaint with burnt sienna, so I'll kind of show you that process.
Yeah.
And then as far as other colors go, obviously you want your primaries. You want a blue, a red, and a yellow, and then just consider that they can be warm or cool. So for example, like a lemon yellow is going to be cool, where like I would call this a cadmium yellow, but Arteza calls it yellow pale. Or even all the way to yellow ochre is going to be warmer. Okay, so thinking about temperature of your paint. Thinking about cool yellow, warm yellow. And then reds, something like a crimson, your Alzarian crimson scarlet is going to be something more red or warm. Of course, it's red. It's a warm red. And then something like, this is the vermilion red, or what's the red called? Is it cobalt red or just red hue? Is more like think of like a fire red, or a red apple is actually more of a cool red versus something that says crimson or scarlet on it. And then your blues, your cerulean and your sky, your cobalt tend to be more cool, whereas like your ultramarine, I have a cobalt violet actually here, tends to be more warm. So, and then of course you've got your neutrals. In addition to burnt sienna, you have like a burnt umber. And sometimes we'll do raw umber and raw sienna too. Those are pretty neutral classic colors, but I don't have them in this kit. So I have a gold, a silver, but cool. So colors, yeah, play around with that depending on what you have. Sometimes I'll do little swatches of new colors that I get. Sometimes I don't. It just kind of depends what you want to do. The canvas paper is nice because you can just use masking tape on it and you don't have to worry about it ripping. So sometimes I'll mask my edges. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I do. It just depends if you want it to be nice and clean afterwards. So I'll mask this for this little demo. You can always trim it after, but there's always this, this wow factor, like when you peel the tape off of something and reveal that nice edge. It's so funny. I'll have students, high school students, that don't like their paintings until the tape comes off. And then they'll be like, I like it now. It's transformed. It's like, it's so funny. I can't tell you, it's happened more than once. So yeah. Oops. Oh my goodness, I'm struggling today. Daddy's in vacation apparently. Okay. So got that taped. Again, this is canvas paper. It already has gesso on it. Again, this is my Turpenoid that I got, 32 ounces. I got this from Amazon. I happen to have like a little jar already. So I'll kind of tell you like how I keep it. This jar, I don't clean my brush in this jar. I dip my brush in this jar to thin my paint while I'm painting. So I use this jar as like medium. I keep it separate. So again, it stays clean that way. And then I use this one for cleaning my brush. And so I open this. See how there's like a little, like a mesh insert. And then there is Turpenoid in here. And then this mesh insert, you can use your brush kind of, as you clean your brush along it, it helps get the paint out. And so, and I'll show you the cleaning the brush process too, because there's a little process with cleaning your paintbrushes. So that's kind of how I do that. And then I have the Liquin Original again, which is the speed drying. And I have not really played around with this, but it also improves the gloss. And from what I've read, it speeds drying by like half the time. And I tried the Arteza, and it took about a week I did this, just this little pair. This took about a week to dry.
Wow.
That's so cute.
Thanks. So, you know, yeah, just, you know, again, I know most of us live in desert climate, and it's winter right now, so it's extra dry, but you never know. Okay, so I'm just going to show you kind of the process that I learned how to paint with oil. And again, this is not the only way, but I think it's a good beginning way. So I'm just going to, and I'll show you my brushes too. I didn't show you my brushes. So I got these from Amazon, and I'll admit they're cheaper brushes. I do have some fancy oil brushes. In fact, I even have some Bob Ross brushes from my grandma. I'll show you some of these. Yeah, so I've got like this guy. This is a Bob Ross blender. This is a Bob Ross Filbert 6. This is a really nice oil brush. So I do have some really nice ones. And I have some from college that I was instructed to buy. Some of them need a little attention and deep cleaning. So I just bought this kind of cheap set on Amazon. So if anyone wants a link or anything, I can send it to you. But it came with more of like the kind of more bristly kind of brushes in different shapes, rounds, flats, and then kind of a smoother. And these are all synthetic brushes.
Yeah, if you could send that link, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll send this link to these. And I can send everything I bought, I think I got on Amazon. So I can send you everything I got if you want. I'm usually a deal. I'll try to shop for deals too, you know, see what I can get.
What is the point of having the long handle brush as opposed to short handle?
That's a really good question. So long handle versus short handle is typically for how you choose to paint. Long handles typically if you're painting on an easel, because you're typically further away from your painting and further away from your art. So you need a longer handle versus a short handle brush is typically if you're working on a tabletop.
Oh.
However, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can use what you want. I will say all my oil brushes and most oil brushes are long handled because I think they assume you're probably going to work on an easel. I don't know. I've worked tabletop, but I will tell you, like all through college and everything, I always worked on easels. So I could use short handle brushes for working on the tabletop. Absolutely. So that's preference, but that's why there is long and short, but in the actual brush, not much difference, except for the fact that I can move my hand further back, thus allowing more movement, you know, different things like that. So,
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So how I would kind of start, and there's some things we can do. I was thinking maybe like a simple sphere or something like that, or a cube, something basic, just to get us started. And I've got some burnt sienna here. And I will tell you, all of my oil paintings I've ever done, I never drew anything out in pencil first. I've always drawn with the oil paint, but you can draw with pencil. You can. It's perfectly fine. The oil paint will cover it. If that's what you want to do, you can. But my professor just kind of showed us how to start sketching with our brushes, so that's what I started doing. So that's kind of what I'll show you today, but please know you can absolutely 100% sketch first. It's acceptable. And my painting professor, his name was Boyd Quinn, and he would just kind of push you out of your seat. He'd just be like, move over, and then you'd take your brush and start painting. oh, do this, do this, do this. Never asked. Just kind of shooed you away. Get out of here. I need to fix this. And so now I'm whenever I don't know, I always ask students, can I help you? Can I show you? I'm like,
That seems a lot better.
yes. All right, so I've got a little burnt sienna. Again, this is my Turpenoid that I use for thinning my paint, not cleaning my brush. Although you can use them, you can do both, but you're gonna notice that this one's gonna get dirty really fast. And so you don't wanna bring the tint of this into your painting. That's why I keep a separate jar, so it stays clean. So you can pull some of your mineral spirits down. Oops, I got some in there, but that's okay. And I'm gonna start just applying a wash. This paintbrush just threw me off. It's a little chunky. I'm not use that one. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna put a wash of burnt sienna over this whole thing.
Wow.
And I will tell you, I did the same thing here, okay?
Oh,
I did a wash of burnt sienna under this too. So just because you start here doesn't mean it's going to stay this color. So talking about a wash a minute, and some of you have heard me say these in class before, but why would you do a wash on your canvas? And the reason is twofold. One, a wash gives you a middle value. I'm no longer painting on white, which serves a couple different purposes. One, it helps you create depth. Two, white can be sort of intimidating to start on a white canvas for some people, not everybody, but some people feel that way. So that can be something sort of helpful. But the second reason, aside from the fact that it gives you a middle value, is it begins the ground for you to start building your paint on, which paint is meant to be layered. So it helps with that. But again, you don't have to have a wash. It's not like you have to. It's not like your painting is going to fall apart if you don't have one, but you can, okay? And again, that's just the purpose of it. So after you get to this point, I then take a little bit more paint with a little less Turpenoid, maybe a little bit in there. Now, you can do things too, and I will show you this actually. If you're like, oh, this is just too dark, I don't like how dark this looks, you can take a cloth, and we would sometimes do this. You can wipe a little bit too. And if it doesn't wipe enough for you, you can put a little bit of mineral spirits on there and wipe some more. Okay, so you can wipe away in oil as well. But I like this color. I like this value. I wiped some off, but you can see on my napkin. Okay, so let's say I want to just do like a sphere. So I would just take my brush, I'm just taking a round, and I'm just gonna start drawing my sphere with the oil paint. Again, I'm just using burnt sienna here. And I'm only using it to draw. I can bring whatever other colors I want into this. You can decide, like, I can mix a little bit more. I can give this a little ground. If you want to. And now there's a couple ways you can approach like the underpainting. You can simply just draw kind of a loose structure like this and then begin painting with your other colors that you want to use. Or you can like render this full thing in value first and then paint on top of it. And when you render in value, you'd want to just really wash this down. So you're almost painting with a very light wash. And notice how I can then, with that wash, pull my edges in and make it not look so outlined anymore. Pull that over. And I'll keep paper towel nearby. You know, if you have too much liquid on your brush, I'll wipe it off sometimes, clean my brush, grab some more paint. Or sometimes wipe my brush and grab just a little bit more of the Turpenoid. And I can bring that in and sort of paint with just the Turpenoid. And I can start to underpaint where this value is going to go. And I can dry a brush off. I can take dry brushes and sort of remove areas a little bit. Push it around a little bit. I can also do the little cast shadow. And again, I'm using quite a bit of Turpenoid here. I can keep my jar as clean as I needed, but well, that's okay. This will become an underpainting jar now. Okay. And same kind of thing, like if I don't like how stark this line is, I don't need it to be. I can just add a little bit of my Turpenoid and get rid of how heavy that line is. So you can change things. You've got time because it's not dry yet. All right, I'm gonna start adding some color in just a second here. So typically, oil, of course, as you can see, it can be thinned down, and I can paint a very light, thin layer. But I can also paint very thick and painterly on top as well. Okay, so I'm just kind of using different brushes. Got plenty, we'll clean them in a minute. Let's see, let's keep it relatively simple here. Maybe go for some crimson red, ultramarine blue. And then I'm gonna darken with a little orange maybe, or actually, no, I'll just do some black, I think. Okay, so I've got black, crimson red, ultramarine blue. Oh, and then of course I will need some white for my highlight. So I've got 4 colors: white, black, ultramarine blue, crimson red here. Just keep it simple. And I'm gonna start with the sphere. So I'm gonna pull out a little crimson red. I'm just gonna pull out all my colors actually in a minute. Drop the lid. Now I see some people wear gloves, which I'm not. You could. Gloves, like just like a thin latex glove or something, if you want to. Okay, so painting this sphere again, and so even though this is still kind of damp. This is dry enough for me to begin painting on now if I want to. Okay, I could let it dry a little bit more, but I like the idea that some of this is going to be brought into my final painting. Again, that's the point of an underpainting. So I'm gonna grab just a little bit of Turpenoid and just pull out my crimson. And decide if I wanna make it crimson or the ultramarine. We'll go ahead and go crimson. So I'm going to take the color straight from the jar and start kind of bringing that onto the sphere kind of throughout the middle for the mid-tone. And of course, just like with any paint, you can play around with your brush strokes. You can have things blend more by sort of overlapping. You can let your strokes show. You can choose how much of the Turpenoid you want to bring in for those initial layers. Then I'll start adding just like a touch of black to that and start pulling that down. So we get to the and of course, something like this, our background is going to help pull things together too. And you can use different brushes for your blending, but I'll kind of sometimes just use the same brush, but then I'll occasionally just, like I mentioned already, I'll just wipe it off a little bit, get some of that excess paint off, and then come back in with some fresh paint. When you're blending colors together, you can sort of think about different ways to move your brush. Sometimes I'll sort of almost like create sort of cross-hatching motions or tapping, stippling motions. So you can play around with all sorts of ways to sort of blend this. All right, so I'm gonna clean my brush off just a little bit here. Oops, I didn't move this. So I'm just cleaning off just a little bit to get some of that dark paint out so I can put a little bit of white and start bringing up more of a highlight. And you could have absolutely like pre-mixed all the different tones you would want to use here. I'm kind of mixing them as I go, but you could absolutely play around with that. And, you know, I might take some of that initial medium color and just sort of blend that back into here. But, you know, I think like painting spheres or just mixing colors or doing something very simple is such a great way to start. I think, you know, a new medium can be very intimidating, especially if you, you know, you just never have done it before. So starting with difficult subject matter can be discouraging sometimes. So I just think it's good to start simple with something like a sphere or a simple object. And again, I can just sort of keep playing around with these values, kind of tapping them back and forth. And again, the advantage here with this oil paint is this is all staying wet enough for me to keep blending. If this was an acrylic, I would have already, stuff would have already dried out on me.
Mhm.
So in that sense, it gives you a lot more time to just, to figure it out. Because that's, you know, that's what this art making is, right? Is we're figuring out, okay, how can we get to know this particular material? Bring out a little bit more of the dark here at the bottom. And again, I just, you know, sometimes I might take like a second brush even with no paint on it. And I just kind of tap the dry brush in between the two colors. dark and the light, and that'll help make a blend. Clean these all after. Yeah, dry brushes can help soften. And again, not that you have to have soft blends, you don't. You can have a more of a textural blend. It just kind of depends on what you're trying to make. Okay, so something like this, then I could start a shadow, and a shadow would sort of depend on what color this is going to be, my table surface, in addition to the sort of reflected light that might be bouncing on it a little bit. So I know we don't have a ton of time left, so I'll just sort of, I don't know, maybe I'll keep it more monochromatic than I was initially thinking. I'll just kind of put in a dark shadow. Now I do have a little bit of the magenta, or sorry, not magenta, scarlet sort of mixed in here. But it's a little tricky to probably see on the screen. And I do have some terpenoid mixed in here too, just so it's a little bit smoother. And I can sort of soften these edges with a dry brush later if I wanted. Where I could tap that off and sort of, you know, it depends what, shadow edges of course look different depending on, you know, the light source and all sorts of different situations. So when you're making it up, it's like you can sort of do what you want. But if you're looking at it from observation, I just pay attention to what the edge looks like. Is it crisp? Is it soft? And kind of go from there. And then, you know, like let's say I want to do like a little bit of a background. Just gonna take a little of this ultramarine, move a little away. I'm just gonna kind of mix some of the colors I already have on my palette here. You know, and I can even, sometimes when we, you know, get that background edge in there and sort of clean that up. And you can, I like a round brush for something like this because you can sort of cut in and pull it around. Some people like to do their backgrounds first. It's really, you know, it's up to you. Get a little bit over here. Yeah, I mean, oils, it's really fun. I definitely, it's can feel intimidating, I think. But I think once you get going with it, there's a lot of things you can do. And then the slow drying time never bothered me with oil. I think some people don't like that, but never bothered me. And I've got this medium to play around with, which I still need to do, but you know, even without it, the slow dry time never bothered me. So I always kind of liked it. I thought I could do, you know, kind of neat things with it. And as far as cleaning your brush, I mean, I could put a ground in here too, but, and I could pop up my highlight, pop in a bit of reflected light down there, really. I should do that. Just, let's see, white. So you'd have just a little, oops, let's see. It's not the best reflected light in the world, but. Typically, you know, sometimes it's up higher, but for the sake of this, we'll just kind of put it at the bottom there. So as far as cleaning, I'm just gonna close that so I don't knock it over. As far as cleaning, my kind of process is I have some paper towel I take my paintbrush and I swirl it around. Then I take it and I wipe it on the paper towel. And then I go back in, I swirl it around again. Come back to the paper towel, and I repeat that process until it starts coming out pretty clean. And so I didn't change this out from last time, so I perhaps need to, but I keep rinsing my brushes and wiping them until they come out pretty clean. Then I go up to my sink and I use that brush cleaner I told you guys about, and I use that with some water. And then I let my brushes dry flat on some paper towel or rags, whatever I've got on hand, before I store them back upright. Because again, keep in mind, if your bristles are wet and you store them upright, it's gonna all sink down into here and cause cracking. So I always lay them out flat to dry, and I do store them upright after they're dry because I just like that. But yeah. So I know that was kind of like a fast little overview, and we'll certainly do more. That's not the only time we'll do oil painting by a long shot, but I think, maybe enough for us to kind of get started. So I'm just curious if anyone has any questions or, things you're wondering about, things I could answer for you. Susan, you're playing around with your oil paints.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, looks good.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to order a large quantity of Turpenoid if I can just get them to deliver it,
Yes.
because I'm working with a teeny little jar here.
Yes. And I know. So you go through so much. Yeah.
And I didn't realize how much you're going to need. And actually, this is my mother's.
Oh my God.
Oh my.
This has been in her paint box for the last 30 years.
Oh, that's cool.
That's neat.
Using it. Well,
That
I
is.
will tell you, I got this book from Amazon. It's called Daily Painting. And Carol Marine is the author. And the whole idea behind it is painting really small little paintings every day. And this book, she is painting in oils. Yep, oil on panel for the most part here. And she talks about her painting process and how this really transformed the way she is painting. So I'm working my way and reading this, but it's been interesting so far to just, this different idea. Cause like long paintings take me a while. They take a while to complete sometimes. So this idea of painting smaller, more intricate daily or as often as you can, I think is a cool concept. So
What was her last name?
it is, I think you say it looks like it's Marine, Marine, Marine,
Okay. Thanks.
unless it has a different pronunciation that I'm totally slaughtering. But yeah, any other oil painting questions or things you're wondering about?
I think that was a good introduction.
Good.
Yeah, it was. I'm going to try underpainting. I haven't done that before. I'm going to definitely try that. I learned quite a bit from you today.
Well, good. I'm glad, because I feel like just the basics. I'm definitely, oil out of all the paint mediums is the one I'm least familiar with, or have done the least of, I would say.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, watercolor to me is just so, watercolor and gouache I love so much because it does the thing where I can let it dry and re-wet it,
Mhm.
take my time.
Yes.
Cleanup is so simple.
Yes.
So that just was so appealing to me, especially throughout college and in my early 20s. It's like, that's all I did, I feel like, was watercolor, gouache, watercolor. And then I started really getting back into acrylics again. And now I'm like, okay, oil again. And it's all fun. It's just, yeah, it's a different type of investment.
What color would you paint